Welcome to the fourth episode of The New Normal by Newsfirst. In today's episode, we'll be exploring the challenges faced by the manufacturing industries and the opportunities in overcoming them. While many of us around the world have been working from home, studying from home, and some of us even socializing from home, the manufacturing industry, where employees are expected to convene at a physical location to produce physical products for physical distribution, has perhaps felt some of the most insurmountable challenges. Supply chain issues, labor, social distancing, distribution, export, demand-side shocks are some of the challenges that have been faced so far. And with us today, we have three eminent panelists: Shia Vikramasinghe, Group Managing Director of Ceylon Biscuits Limited; Rajat Vasam, Managing Director of Haycarb and Director of Haley's PLC; and Hussain Akbar Ali, Director of Akbar Brothers. I'm also joined by Chandra Jayaratna, former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, who will act as rapporteur. To begin, Shia, could you tell me, is it even possible for manufacturers to work from home? At the beginning of lockdown, as the curfew was imposed, what was your immediate reaction?
For manufacturers to work from home is not possible for most of our employees. Yes, some support services for sure can be supported remotely, but the manufacturing processes requires teams of people to work at site. What went through our minds when we had this lockdown was it was very conflicting, actually. On the one hand, you wanted to make sure that you have the best interests of all your employees, but at the same time, we are in the food business and we fall under essential services. It's very important to keep the food supply chain intact, because if food was to go into shortage, and we are involved in a number of food industries, that would cause a huge problem. So yeah, the initial, but we knew. We knew we had to work, and we were a company that started our manufacturing operations very minimum, very quickly after the curfew was imposed, because in reality we had to.
Right. And Hussain, what about yourself? Your industry is quite unique. And could you tell us some of the challenges that you faced at the outset and your first reactions as curfew was imposed?
So actually, I think we had a 1 week precursor to the curfew where the government announced to work from home. From our side, we'd already seen demand pent up from a lot of our markets where, the virus had already started spreading. So people had increased demand, and we had already committed to firm orders. So the minute the work from home started, actually, we had to get our processes in place to start our operations up and going. And I think it started, step number one was management and the senior teams getting together and decided we wanted to do this and somehow keep our manufacturing industry uninterrupted. Second, and I think most basic, was actually getting the infrastructure in place. Pre-COVID, I think only 30% of our staff had laptops. Everyone else had desktops. So even something fundamentally like getting laptops and internet connections to the key personnel so that they could operate from home. And then, subsequently installing all the necessary safety precautions at our factories. And then finally, even we started, I think, pretty much 5 or 6 days after the curfew was imposed, we started operations. And I think there's been a lot of fine tuning and kind of learning on the fly. So, along with the work from home and the factories operating, we're trying to keep our staff motivated, training them to a certain degree online on health and safety and stuff. And, even basic things like fitness classes, trying to keep them engaged, because I think it does take a huge mental toll on people, this whole thing.
Absolutely. Rajita, the two other panelists also are in industries where demand spiked, but I'm sure nothing compared to the demand spike faced in your industry, where some of your products are used in manufacturing masks and filters and so on and so forth. how did you initially react, when the work from home was imposed and the curfew was imposed to maintain feedstock security and also make sure that those orders were filled?
Yeah, definitely it was a challenge. Now, even prior to the COVID-19 hit the globe, basically the HACCP operation, which is primarily on coconut shell-based activated carbon, which is largely used for water filtration, air filtration, and also for the mining industry around the globe, where we have about 16% of the global share. So the demand was very high even prior to the pandemic. So once the pandemic hit, the biggest hit on our supply chain was in Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka straight away towards mid-March went for a straight lockdown, very strict control of the coronavirus situation, and along with the lockdown went for curfew. We were very lucky in one sense that by design, 55% of our manufacturing was overseas. So we had 2 facilities in Indonesia, 2 in Thailand, apart from our largest base, single base in Sri Lanka in 2 factories. So the first thing we did was we ramped up our capacity. We were at about 90%, and with the teams that are involved there, we have in every factory about 10 expat Sri Lankans working in the management. So we had very close discussions with them and basically stretched the capacity to about 110%. So when Sri Lanka was shut down, we were able to reallocate some of the orders that are very crucial to the other 4 factories and keep the supply chain moving. So at the same time, we worked with the Sri Lankan authorities, and although we are not a locally essential service, but our exports are going to global essential services. So on that basis, we got very clear mandate from the government to operate our factories. So we started small, but we took all our work in progress out and then started the factories gradually. And at the same time, we had a very, very close contact with our customers and explained them the situation and basically managed that supply chain through. Luckily, we had a policy of keeping our key raw material, which is coconut charcoal, of 3 months inventory at every factory. So that is a policy that we had because of its agricultural product, and we have gone through various cycles of weather impacts to have the inventory primary raw material shortages. So we had that in place. So we were safeguarded by that as well. So overall, I would say the demand, what you say is correct. The post-COVID demand spiked. So we had the overseas operations, and we took Sri Lanka operations back into place with all the controls in place in Sri Lanka, as well as in all 4 factories overseas with very strict hygiene conditions. So far, we have been able to manage. I would say we are not come out of it. We still have a significant amount of back orders, but we have given clear visibility to our customers. It's going to be 2 weeks delay, 4 weeks delay, but you are going to get your product by this date. So we are managing it very closely, and what we are going to do in May and June are going to be very, very critical for us as to how we come out of this as well. So far it has been managed very well, I would say.
Thank you very much for shedding light on that. Hussein, could you tell us a little bit about how the outbreak of COVID-19 reinforced or tightened the requirements for manufacturing plants, and what measures are being implemented? In other parts of the world, we're seeing factories implement distance markers using perspex panels or lines on the ground. What measures are being taken in your industry at the moment?
I think manufacturers all over the world are kind of grouping together and learning from each other at this point. So I think the basic principle is space, and you have to respect the distance from one another, and especially within the people working in the industry. So for example, where our packing lines normally would have, 12 to 15 people standing almost shoulder to shoulder, we've had to now space those out to include, at least a 6-foot distance in between each one. We're lucky because in some of our industries, this can be done with conveyors and things pretty easily. So that's a good thing. Other industries are not as fortunate. it all boils down to simple things, splitting your lunch breaks, making sure that when you're changing shifts, that one shift does not have any contact with the incoming shift, so that in case there is God forbid the worst happen and there is a situation in the factory, you can isolate it and pinpoint it to a person or to a particular group of people and not completely inundate your entire supply chain or your entire manufacturing facility. Apart from the usual, I can't say anything over and above what we've done. I think the most drastic thing in our industry is, I'm sure you've seen pictures of the tea tasters and how they used to taste teas, cup after cup. That no longer can be done. You can't share spoons anymore in the COVID days. So we've had to start using disposable spoons and stop some of that. But yeah.
Thank you, Shia. What about your industry? What measures are being implemented right now?
So we work very, very closely with the local health authorities to ensure that we adhere to WHO and local guidelines. So we've done several things. In some plants, we've done the contact traceability to an extent that, we arrange transport door to door for our staff. And from that point, we've also segregated people according to the plants they work on, which then includes not only where, at their work point, but also how they have lunch, which restrooms they use. So we really tried to minimize overlap of people contacting each other, so that they work within their own teams. Lunchrooms and public areas, washrooms have had strict controls, because despite all the education given, these are areas where everything breaks down. So yeah, we physically have separations put in, and a lot of education. Being a food factory, being involved in food, anyway we used to wear mouth guards, but just educating them, look, it's not on your mouth, but you now need to cover your nose as well. You think it's a simple thing, but it's very challenging. And I think education, because at first there was an immense fear about what COVID is. Then as time went on, I think that fear was replaced by, okay, we are doing all this and we come to work and our workplace is safe. But that doesn't translate to a wider population that all these precautions of social distancing are a way of life. I think that message has not gone through. So as a company, with our staff, we're trying to do this, and we're trying to drive the message beyond what they need to do in the factory as well.
So, Shia, what about the cultural challenges? Sri Lankans in general are quite tactile by nature. And all those social distancing practices are being adhered to on the factory floor. What are the practical challenges of enforcing them, in the lunchroom or when staff leave the premises? And what can businesses and governments do to improve the quality of the awareness? You talked about education. What can governments and businesses do to increase the education and the quality of that education? You're
absolutely right, So, in your workplace, in where you do, if you tell somebody, okay, you stand here, you do this, that's a part of a procedure, and that's understood that something needs to be done that way. But even simple things like in the lunchroom, our people are used to sharing their food. That's a very common practice. So we had to actually put physical barriers to avoid people from doing that, because we have social distancing norms in our lunchroom. But you're right, it's a cultural thing, so you have to physically put barriers. And currently, the next challenge is we want to take this beyond our factory, because when they're coming to that factory, the first thing that is done is temperatures are checked, they wash their hands. At every point of where they move, there's hand sanitizer. So in the factory, it's very regimented, but I don't think a lot of people realize that this kind of awareness has to go back when you go back to your place of where you live. So that is what we are trying. And I think as a message, we had a lot of public awareness messages go on media, and then a lot of doctors on social media. and we educated people about washing hands and why they need to do. And I've seen some very good videos done by the medical profession also on social distancing. But I think because of the cultural nuances, I think it needs to be pushed more. The countries that really came out of this very fast were countries that adhered to social distancing and understood what that meant. And I think in that area, our media and key influencers for our population need to get involved and really explain to people what this is. This is not only about your workplace. This is about how we live our life for the next few months or longer until the transmission of this virus is ended.
Thank you, Shia. Rajitha, I'm going to come back to you. I mean, Shia and Hussein have shed some light on some of the practices that are taking place in their industry. You know, how long do you think these measures will have to be adhered to, in your opinion, Rajitha?
I mean, I would think it is at least till the end of this year. That is another 6-7 months more at the minimum, unless you find a kind of miraculous escape out of this through a vaccine, and the vaccine is capable of manufactured into kind of millions and millions of scaling up. So the minimum horizon that we are looking at is till at least for December, but I would be surprised it will be 1 year or a little more until a vaccine comes up, because at the moment, what is predicted is that there could be the possibility of a second wave and a third wave, and all will depend on some of the other countries where the winters are going to hit after the summer now, particularly in the western side, whether there will be another major cycle that is a second wave or a third wave that could come in. The danger or the complication here is this is a global problem. Almost every country in the globe has has affected by it. So we eradicating COVID-19 here does not mean that we can be on the comfort zone, because it could come through the borders, and it could be kind of another couple of weeks after kind of we having the 0 patients that we could have another cluster. So we are seeing that in Sri Lanka now as well, because we see it's coming down, and again another cluster comes, and there is also danger of these people with no symptoms. So that is a real danger unless the testing regimes come up to very large scale, where the largest number of population can be tested and each of the community areas can be cleared. So in our opinion, it could be medium to long-term effect until a proper treatment, A, is found, or B, if a vaccine is found globally, and that can be made available to all the countries. So we are taking that view, and basically what we are telling our people and everybody that are involved in the supply chain, that is forward and backward, all stakeholders, is that be prepared to live under these circumstances longer term, and let this be a new normal, and let's be prepared to adhere to these practices as good practices and the must-do practices for a foreseeable future. Because we cannot be very optimistic and too optimistic and say it's going to last only 1 or 2 months. So we have to create that culture and a standard way of living and social practices within the company. And as Shia mentioned, what is most important is more than inside the company, which is a must, but when they go out of our facilities, how they live their life in their homes. So in that sense, it has to be part of the entire Sri Lankan culture, and maybe a global culture where people are practicing social distancing or physical distancing with proper hygiene practices. So we are taking a long-term view of the necessary changes that need to take place. We are taking a view that business is not going to be the same for tomorrow. Even post-COVID situation is going to be different. So let's prepare for it, and let's put the necessary systems around it.
Thank you, Rajitha. Hussein, I mean, the panelists, I think, have reached a consensus in that these social distancing measures are here to stay, particularly, you know, in sensitive industries where food is involved and food preparation is involved in particular. And I think the panelists have also, you know, made it very clear that the cultural shift has to occur as well. Could you tell us a little bit about what you think the implications would be on productivity and morale? How do you maintain morale and social distancing and also, make sure that people are safe at the same time?
I think one great example of this, times are changing, is the Colombo tea auction. So, the auctions have been held for over 100 years in, rooms with large gatherings of people where we bid competitively for the teas that we buy. Within 2 weeks after COVID, that entire platform that has stood true for, over a century went completely online, and it looks like it's staying this way. So change is coming fast, and change is coming to stay. I think regarding the staff and keeping people motivated, especially on the manufacturing floors, is going to be a challenge, because it is hard work. It is also a lot that they need to take on to be socially responsible and keep the distancing. And as Shia mentioned, you are eliminating a lot of the social aspects out of the work day. That cup of tea that they look forward to with their friends, or the meal that they shared with their friends at work, is no longer there, because it's a more isolated event. But this is the new normal, and I think people have to adapt and kind of understand how serious this is going forward, because a country like ours cannot afford a second or third outbreak. We've had one chance to crush this, and I think that's all that we get. Economically, we can't handle any more of this.
That's, thank you, Hussein. Shia, Hussein alluded a little bit to the advent of technology in his industry. How much infusion of technology do you think is still possible in your industry in particular?
Well, if you take supply chain, there is a lot that can be done. We can go towards a paperless operation, and we are looking at that. And I think traceability is another factor, especially for exports, which is going to become a huge conversation going forward. But also things like on some of our lines, for example, now, if I would give an example of one of our lines, it's a European brand, and when we troubleshoot, the normal practice would be to get a technician, probably fly down a technician from a closest point, because very few are based in Sri Lanka. Now the technology that they have developed for this one particular machine is, when the operator has a machine, he has a virtual camera visor, so to speak, where what he sees and a technician in Sweden can see the same thing. And then that technician, for example, can give instructions to our operator by way of a diagram which he can virtually see. So technology has gone leaps and bounds. Normally, so within a half an hour to a few hours, depending how complex the problem is, you can troubleshoot your problem. As in the past, this is nothing to do with COVID, but I think these are the kind of changes that we have to look for. In the past, to sort a problem like that would have taken several days at the very least. So yeah, I think technology can play a big role in going forward in all aspects of the supply chain. So I think, and that is the opportunity, and that is what COVID has given us in instances where we said, look, this can't be done. We had no choice. We had to do things like the tea auction. They would have never probably done it if not for the fact that we were pushed into doing it. And I think this has opened the eyes of many of us to see what can be done and what, going forward, how can we make more efficient our processes, giving maximum flexibility to our employees. I think there are a lot of conversations to be had going forward.
Thank you. Last week's episode focused a little bit on, focused entirely on digital transformation as a means of increasing competitiveness. and it was made very clear to us that technology was the key enabler, key driving force that was enabling people to function throughout this pandemic. Rajitha, in your industry, how much automation is already done, and how much room is there to increase automation? Shia mentioned IoT and using technology to troubleshoot and still be global. What kind of initiatives are being taken in your industry for IoT, automation, and using new technologies?
Yeah. If I take a pragmatic look at the situation, I think I would approach this in a little different way, because why I say this is, as a nation, we have to protect our employment as well. So it's the solution does not lie, investing millions and millions of dollars and automating everything, right? So at the end of the day, you need to find employment for the Sri Lankan people. And a lot of employment has been lost at the time being. A lot of foreign jobs have been lost. The impact is going to be enormous socially and economically. So there is a huge challenge for us, especially in the manufacturing industry that we are responsible for. How do you protect the jobs on one hand? And at the same time, how do you run your industry in a safe way, the best of hygiene way, without having this disease? Right? So the way that we are looking at the company is, okay, you box out what you need to do internally, right? That is, manufacturing has to happen internally, right, with our people. Then in terms of, say, external factors like the marketing and sales, how much of that can be done distant or digitally, or using the combination of those methodology without having the physical one-on-one face? Because whether we like it or not, our export buyers won't be able to travel at least for another 6 to 12 months. So we need to keep that close rapport and a close connection with our markets. So what are the mechanisms that we can use? How do you bring them virtually into Sri Lanka? Instead of having factory visits that they used to come for audits, how do you make it open like a virtual visit to your factory? How do you do an audit without the auditor being present in the company? How do you do that online? How do you show them virtually? So there has to be a lot of different technologies that had to come in that sense. So video conferencing is one. What we are doing, in fact today is something that is out of the ordinary, right? We never did chats like this. So likewise, you translate your customer and the market interface into models like that. Can you have a virtual show of your company? Can an auditor do on a remote basis? Can they see the processes of the company through video, better visuals, a live environment of the factory? And can a quality manager of a factory really run through the factory and its processes so that the auditor on the other end can see? So that is one level of technology that is to be brought in. Then what are the functions that can remotely be done? For example, all banking that we do, there's been a lot of manual work. Even peons used to carry checks and go, and all that can be digitalized and be online platform. So as far as banking is concerned, no need to go to the bank, no bankers need to come. So likewise, the supplier side, how do you do that? So you keep the company internal, you try to protect the jobs, which is social responsibility, because we cannot eliminate those jobs because there is a national responsibility that we have. So how do you safeguard that community? So now, earlier, if your interaction was, say 4x, right? Now you reduce it to only x. So 1/4 of that interaction. So you already have cut your network or the company's exposure by about 4-folds. You have cut it down. Now that critical mass you have, that is your factory flow, factory employees, the officers that need to be in close contact, very few meetings face to face, what is most critical with the correct physical distancing to take place, and then how do you protect that community, right? Do you have to, in the long term, look at hostel facilities? Do you have to bring your workforce in, keep them for 1 month inside, and give all the necessary facilities, the food, all the hygiene conditions, and do we have to live like that? How do you take that to their home and protect it? And as Hussein mentioned, if an incident happens, now for example, we have to run what if scenario. What if a COVID-19 patient is found inside your factory, right? Is the solution to seal the company, close the operation for 14 days? Or do you have a very transparent method where you have tracked all the employees, like the intelligence services that you do now, proper disclosures? Then you can find that cluster and the government can intervene and eliminate that cluster. And we have that kind of systems in the company. So I think it is very important that that core is protected, the employment is given, that very core is managed in a very disciplined way so that the COVID-19 does not creep in. Rest of the boundary, you just partition and say the technology, the digitalization, all that to take on and to minimize those exposures. So that is the way that we are practically looking at for the industry to survive.
Rajitha, thank you very much for those valuable contributions. I do agree. I think that there are some processes that could seriously be improved and digitalized. I just want to pick up on one point that you mentioned at the very beginning of your statement. And that was, I agree that it's important to protect employees, although I wouldn't necessarily say that it's important to protect jobs per se, because I think that we should be looking at upskilling staff. I believe that they should be, educated and being given the skills to contribute more meaningfully to their personal economy and the economy as a whole. What do you think about replacing, let's say, a low-skilled function of a business with automation and freeing up that labor capacity to do something that's more valuable to them and to the organization?
Definitely, that is a part. That is one aspect we are looking at is the multi-skilling. For example, today, if you take as a kiln operator, so in the case of gloves, that the products we are managing, that in a glove line, instead of say they're managing only the operating part of it, can you take the technical part of that machine as well? So instead of having a technician and an operator, can the operator be responsible for the entire line to have the technical aspects also? So it is the multi-skilling, upscaling that you need to practice. But whatever we are trying to look at, I think it is also important, Niro, to understand the reality of the Sri Lankan economy and the Sri Lankan workforce. Today, if you see, I mean, the state of our economy, when this rupees 5,000 allowance was given, I mean, you see how many people are getting entitled either properly or improperly for that 5,000 rupee allowance. So think about, I mean, this is the largest disconnect that we have between the Colombo or the Western province and the rest of the province of the country, that there's a huge disparity of income. And we really don't understand the nature of people's economic capability. So if a person cannot, today's Sri Lankan economy and the employment base is such that vast majority of the people, if they can't get 1 month's pay, right, there's no way that they can survive the next month, right? So we are in a situation like that. So there is a huge necessity for everybody, from the policy making to the industry to every social tier, to understand this wide disparity of income that exists in Sri Lanka, and whatever the solution that we give has to cater. I definitely agree that upgrading has to take place, but we have to take up that wide majority as well. Now, for example, if we digress a little bit, the agriculture sector, like if you move away from the export, the others, you may be coming back to some of these topics. One of the key vital sectors to revive Sri Lanka is the value-added agriculture. The largest employment base in Sri Lanka is. So how do you create, and what you saw what is happening during the COVID-19 period, how the farmers cannot sell their produce, and the huge impacts that you have in that supply chain. So all those are priorities for the policymakers, and not only for them. I think as a Sri Lankan public and businesses, these are key challenges that we see on our citizens. So therefore, Apart from export manufacture, I think one of the largest areas post-COVID that has a potential to grow and modernize is the agriculture and the agricultural inputs. That is going to be very, very essential.
Rajitha, thank you very much. I think that amidst all of these challenges that we're talking about at the beginning, one very, very important opportunity was highlighted, and that is in value-added agriculture, both for the local market as well as for export. And you did touch on supply chain, which is why I want to turn my attention to Hussein and talk a little bit about the supply chain challenges that would have been faced. Feedstock security is at the very core of your business. Wherein factories secure supply from plantations. How did the lockdown impact the immediate supply to factories and then from factories to market? And what were the mitigating measures that were taken at that time?
So actually, I must say that I think Sri Lanka handled this part really well. Just to give you a little background, tea is a perishable crop. So you have a window in which it can be harvested to get its optimum, essence and form. So if you do not keep harvesting tea and you let it stay for even more than 2 weeks, you can do long-term damage to the crop. I think the government did notice this, and they made it quite early on an essential service. So the factories were in operation. The 500 or so tea factories in Sri Lanka were all in operation. They were plucking tea and they were manufacturing tea. For us on the supply chain, the biggest problem became transportation of tea, especially since they were very strict on not crossing districts. And also very early on, as the curfew started, the process to get curfew passes was quite cumbersome, and they only issued a pass for 1 day. So you'd have instances where, lorry drivers would be standing all day in a line to get the curfew pass to deliver tea, get the pass by evening, and by the time they reach Colombo, the curfew pass is already over. I think a lot of these issues were ironed out and it was streamlined, so it is much more a much smoother flowing supply chain regarding the tea input. But I think a lot of our suppliers face the same problems we had. So as soon as we started operations, we said, okay, let's start work. But on day number 1, we had less than 5% turnout of our staff. Day number 2, maybe less than 10. And we gradually built that up to, let's say, 50, 60% where we are today. And our suppliers were having the same issues. So you take the guy who supplies us cartons for the tea. We were open, but he was not open, or he wasn't open at a capacity big enough to supply us. So I think it took a good 2 to 3 weeks during the curfew period, and for people to kind of get used to that routine, for the supply chain to flow somewhat smoothly. I'm not saying that it's anywhere close to being as good as it was pre-COVID, but it's come to a level where we can operate to a certain scale now. Of course, there is still a long way to go, and a lot that needs to be done on all our fronts to get there.
Before I move my attention to Shia, I just want to ask you, Hussein, do you think that there are opportunities, or there will be opportunities in your industry for backward integration? Do you think that traditional tea traders will move into ownership and management of tea estates, or do you think that they'll move into the packaging business? There must be integration opportunities there as well.
Regarding backward integration of tea, growing tea is a very, very different skill set to to packaging and marketing and exporting it. And I think the way our tea system in Sri Lanka is set up, anyway, all tea needs to go through a fair auction process. So there is no clear advantage to anyone owning their own supply in this industry. Regarding packaging suppliers, I could see some consolidation in the future, especially if there are very, very critical items that need to be supplied to industry that we depend on maybe 1 or 2 suppliers. We might take it upon ourselves to bring that in-house, but it's still too early on. Everyone is still on a defensive mode, not yet on the full aggressive mode.
I don't want to touch on a sensitive subject, but you mentioned that there isn't an advantage for for tea exporters really to own a plantation. Is there an advantage for a plantation owner to own a plantation? Can they forward integrate, or they have to go through the auction anyway? So are they the most constrained in the supply chain, the plantation owner?
So the plantation owner can be an exporter as well. And in fact, a lot of plantation owners do have export arms. So even Haley's has a large plantation arm and they do export as well. But the fact of the matter is even the tea that they export has to be bought from the auction. So the price is set by a fair mechanism by all the players in the industry. You do not get a price advantage by owning your own estate.
Okay, understood. The only thing is you might have greater security of supply, but that is also debatable because you still have to go through the auction process. Understood. Thank you, Hussein. Shia, coming back to you, COVID-19 had a unique impact on the supply chain. It was not uncommon for businesses to face demand shocks or supply shocks prior to this. And in some cases, supply chain equilibrium was reached with no supply and equally no demand. I'm sure this was not the case in your industry because demand did spike with a little bit of panic buying, both locally and internationally. How did your organization and how did your industry manage the bullwhip effect and preventing that so that there weren't supply shocks all the way through the supply chain?
So if you take the FMCG business, the local market, March for most FMCG brands, March is a huge peak. When COVID struck, actually, it affected our best trading month of the year. I mean, in my almost 30 years of working, I don't think we've experienced this kind of shock just before Sinhala and Tamil New Year, which is a peak buying period for the local community. So in anticipation for that, and I'm sure a lot of companies would have been in the same place, we actually built stocks up for March and April sales just before the Sinhala and Tamil New Year. So this actually saved us to a lot. It buffered us from the kind of reaction that could have happened if we didn't have that. And while we didn't work, the latter part of March was very, we're just trying to get our operations into order. Didn't have much production going. We had our stocks to buffer us in the local market. Export markets, not so lucky. And also, funnily enough, as COVID hit global markets, the demand for food just went over the roof. So, I mean, every food exporter I speak to, they've had increases in demand. And that has been more challenging to meet, purely because of organizing local supply chain. Some of the things that you heard, getting transport was an issue. Getting workers to come, certain areas were stricter than others in allowing people to work. So all this took time to organize, but at the same time, a lot of export buyers did understand that these are not normal circumstances, and because everybody was really in the same position. So that's how we were able to overcome it.
And are you finding, or were you finding at that time that buyers were requesting extended payment terms, or are they still requesting extended payment terms, or has it been relatively?
Actually, for us and in our cash flow, we've been very fortunate, and we have a very good relationship with our buyers. And no, they did not take advantage of this period to change trading terms. So, but what we do see, and in March, we saw it a little bit more. The local trade, money circulation was very tight. We see it easing off a little bit now, but these coming months will be challenging. With employment increasing, purchasing power might decrease. So coming months need to be observed to see how the impact will come.
You mentioned challenges in importing certain raw materials. Has the temporary suspension of imports affected your industry, perhaps some of your suppliers or even yourselves?
Yes, some materials that we use in manufacture are in that list. So we have been told that we can get approval. So I think they're trying to put a process in place. But currently, while we've applied for such approvals, it is taking time. So I think the process has not got cemented properly. So we need to work on that with government bodies, because they do understand that industry is important. Industry has to work in a time where unemployment is surging. At least the industries that can work need to ensure that they're fully functional. So I think that recognition is there, and we need to iron out all these issues that are coming up with the decisions that have been made in the last few weeks.
Sure. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Raw material supply is experiencing delays in any case, simply because of export challenges from countries of origin. I do think it is important for the industry as a whole to make the government and the policymakers aware that these temporary suspensions only really exacerbate that problem, particularly when certain payment terms are imposed. It becomes even more difficult to get access to those raw materials, which are critical for local industries, not only to cater to the local market, but also for exports. I don't know if you agree with me, but from just looking at the industry from outside, it seems like a challenge that needs to be overcome. Would you agree?
But I think Sri Lanka has wider problems as well with our balance of payments. I mean, I think COVID just struck a huge blow to this economy. I mean, we were surging. Pre-COVID, I mean, tourism was booming. Apparel industry was, we were just on a high, and just within a few weeks, this whole thing crumbled. So I think everyone is groping. I think the key thing is that when decisions are made, all stakeholders must be consulted. So sometimes, yes, hard decisions may have to be made, but you do it through a consultative process so that everyone knows how to deal with it. As I said, they recognize the fact that no, you can't just suspend all imports that you need, but the process has to be improved, probably. Yeah.
Hussein, I'm going to just ask you, supply chain, single source typically, traditionally has been a risk. Would you mind telling us, what do you think about the future? Is single source still going to be seen as a risk, or what is becoming more important than diversity of source?
So for the tea industry, I think we've been lobbying all this time to pitch for single source. We believe our tea, and actually I do firmly believe our tea is the best in the world, and that we should get a premium for it, and that we do not want it diluted with other origin teas. So single source is definitely for us a very important part in the industry. But I think even in the future, the consumers are going to want to drill down even further. Country of origin is not going to be good enough. I think they'll want to go down even to the factory level. And we're already seeing that with a lot of European and American buyers. They want to know that the product they get is from a factory where its employees are looked after well, they're working in proper conditions, hygienic conditions, being paid fairly, and that's given birth to so many of these accreditations, such as Rainforest Alliance or UTS certified, which have taken over all over the world, which give kind of a stamp of certification for people who are doing their industry or doing their business better than the par.
Rajitha, I'm going to ask you very quickly in terms, just your thoughts on supply diversity. how many, how much supply diversity is present in your industry? Is traceability important, in terms of supply, or is it commoditized to some degree?
Yes, I mean, as many industries, there is a certain level of commoditization that has taken place in the industries that operate. I mean, basically, the industries that are responsible for the carbon products, corporate carbon, the glove operations, medical, industrial, and also fiber. But our direction right through has been to go up in the value chain. So we have had very specific strategies to monitor and manage strategically what that upward value stream is. For example, we have right through in our strategy identified that at least 30% of our product portfolio should be on high value products. And that every year we should try to increase that percentage at least by about 5%. So in about another 5-6 years time, we can take it to, with the global market improvements, that another at least 10% more on the value addition. Now, whilst you say this, we have also moved into the commoditization, which is the bulk volume. So this is where we have diversified operations overseas. For example, if you look at our manufacturing footprint, most of the commoditized grades of our active carbon operations are coming from Indonesia at the moment. So highest value range comes from Sri Lanka. So you keep a balance. You need to have your high volume, low margin items of the group that is covering your overhead, and the lower manufacturing cost countries, whereas where the cost of manufacture is higher, and also where you have your technologies and the skills that you can upscale your production processes and technologies, you have the highest value addition. So in that sense, primarily we have been working on a hybrid model, percentage of our product portfolio to be on high value, and the rest of the large expansion in terms of our capacities to be done on the commoditized range. But it is very, very important to understand that even, I mean, one of the post-COVID situations, and even prior to the post-COVID, the situation did exist, especially with the trade war that became quite apparent with China and so on. There was a lot of visibility that was requested by the customers, because we are primarily in all our sectors we deal in, it is a B2B. We are not handling B2C. In the case of B2C, the trends could be even more dynamic. But in the B2B market segments that we are operating, most of our customers were very, very keen in the sustainability aspect of it. That is how sustainably we are manufacturing, how socially responsible we are. And in terms of manufacturability, what is the quality system, how transparent you are, your traceability systems, and how do you make a product that is day in and day out consistent quality. So part and parcel of the whole process was the factory audits, their visits, then seeing what we do. I mean, they're assessing our, apart from our manufacturing capability, our management capabilities and so on, our labor practices, how the scales of pay and how the social aspects of those being taken care of, and also towards the backward integration. How effectively are you backward integrated so that supply chain is secure? And how is that value chain working? So all these have been critical parts of our every industry that we are operating to have that competitive advantage. So I would believe post-COVID, this situation is going to be even stronger. And only difference I would say is that physical interaction may not be there, but the technology will have to replace it and give that emphasis to the customers and the audits and the society at large, so that they can see what we are trying to do. But they have found through these difficulties that how reliable your supply chain has to be. If you had ABC suppliers in your system, you took B and C only because of the price. You kept A because it's reliability, but A you had to pay a premium. So through this exercise, most of the companies in the West or our customers have realized your B and definitely C is failing in a crisis, right? B, you paid little more, he's better. But A, where you had to pay the premium for the systems that he had, then he's the most reliable supply source. So this gives a very important message to the post-COVID situation, where the companies who have invested on the systems, invested on the people, and invested on the customer transparency aspect of it, they would become stronger. And the customers will pay a premium because they have learned their lesson through this crisis.
Thanks, Rajitha. I'm just going to take a moment for me to draw the attention of the audience to the question and answer function, which is built in in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Please do feel free to ask questions. The questions I will pose to the panelists a little later on. You're welcome to put your name, or you're welcome to maintain anonymity as you wish. I will be reading out your name if you do write it. So please do go ahead and ask questions. Now on to my next question, which Rajitha had touched on a little bit of it as well in his answer. Shia, so in some cases, retailers were affected. So manufacturers had to find ways of reaching clients directly, essentially becoming retailers themselves. In last week's episode, which is available online, we discussed technology being an enabler, and that and the opportunities for e-commerce. Have you seen many manufacturers in your industry actually using e-commerce to become retailers and reach the customer directly?
Ourselves, we have a range of FMCG products. We've used existing platforms like Daras and Pick.me to get our products in. And we've also created our own, because we have probably one of the largest distributor networks in Sri Lanka. So to deliver, a lot of the existing platforms only deliver within city limits in most cases. Whereas with our extended dealer platform, what it pushed us in a very short time is to develop a network to deliver goods at a time when the country was in lockdown, using our distributor networks. So that last mile contactability, it pushed us. Honestly, if not for this shutdown, we wouldn't have done it so fast. And the demand that we see, of course, we are living in exceptional circumstances.
It's
and this will change, but it's actually been quite mind-boggling to see the demand. And I think what this change also did was Sri Lanka was very behind in e-commerce. If you compare to India, for example, people didn't trust the online platforms, maybe payment through online platforms. But this situation with COVID has forced people, they had no choice. And I think once they get used to I mean, there's going to be a normalization when shops open up, but I think that is still going to be a large amount of e-commerce happening from now on.
Okay, thank you. Hussein, I know it's slightly different in your industry where, B2C isn't really the name of the game for you. But I have seen, online tea retailers, particularly in the specialty teas and things like that. What do you think the future is of, the tea trade online? Do you think that there is room for it? Do you think that people are going to, purchase retail tea online instead of going and purchasing it in a retail outlet?
I think definitely. I think tea also counts as an FMCG product, and as people get more and more comfortable with ordering things online, and more often than not getting a better price, easy delivery, and very convenient terms, I think the shift is here to stay. E-commerce always had a problem of adoption. It was getting the person to place the first order was always the most challenging for all the big retailers, because after you place the first one, the attrition rate is very high. People are more likely to place more and more orders. So I know we don't really sell a lot of tea over here, but we've seen unprecedented demand from all our agents. We export our branded teas to over 80 countries. And in some of those countries, which, you wouldn't expect, places like Iran or, certain parts of the UAE and Saudi to have a huge online presence. But we've seen demand in those areas online pick up significantly. So I do believe that it's here to stay.
Thanks, Hussein. I'm going to shift our focus a little bit onto labor and productivity. Sri Lanka is infamous for having a large number of holidays that interrupt productivity. Given the loss of productivity during this lockdown period, do you think the industry will have to catch up in the coming months? I'm posing this question to Rajitha. Rajitha, would you?
Yeah, definitely there is catching up that is required. But I would call it, there has been a lot of talk about this leave aspect, the holiday aspect of it. I think we need to be more broader than that. We are going to be a bit more intelligent than that to realize that the bulk of the issue is not with regard to getting people to work more, right? Because this is a very, very, very empirical thing that comes out. Okay, people have been working at homes for 1.5 months, 2 months. People couldn't come to work, so do you need to cancel holidays and right through work? This is especially we need to be very, very emotionally intelligent to handle this process. We have to understand that every Sri Lankan has been scared, including me, of the COVID-19, right? Like I had my family, I had my elderly parents who need to be safeguarded. Everyone has the same situation. So you need to have, a lot of management gurus have spoken about empathy. Now we have to put this empathy in front of us, but at the same time, knowing that we have a business to run, right? So industries which have back orders, significant areas to catch up, where they can sell more than what they used to produce, yes, definitely yes. You need to come up with productivity options. Canceling leave of people or taking out holidays is not the best way to do it, because all the people stayed at home these 1.5 months, 2 months. Everybody has gone through really a mental dilemma here. A lot of countries, including Sri Lanka, a lot of people could be going through depression without speaking about it. There has been a lot of domestic violence when people have been at home. There's been a lot of social implications that has not come up to the surface yet, and they may not come up to the surface at all as well. So this is common everywhere in the world. So therefore, you need to really put the empathy in front and understand if you want to get the best productivity out of the people, and when the people are coming to work, now we are putting a new set of conditions. You must wear a face mask. You must have a social distancing. You can't, as you used to do, you can't talk with your friends. So this is, even when you are eating, you have to eat alone. You can't talk, you can't share your food. Those and beside the work life, your entertainment, the entertainment you used to have is almost zero, right? You can't go out. You can't go out for a film. You can't. Beside the family that the 4-5 members you have, your social circle is completely dislodged. So you need to understand this mindset that is common for a CEO and common for a worker as well. So this is the first time, irrespective of, I think, the level of hierarchy of the society, people have gone through the same problem of social distancing, same problems of not being able to move out, not being able to be entertained at every level. Today in Sri Lanka, if you have COVID, you have to go to IDH. No one can fly to Singapore. So the most richest and the worker are in the same boat. So in that sense, I think what you have gone through, I think what I have gone through during this period, I must put into practice and understand that every worker in my factory, in my company is also going through the same problem. So the answer is a hybrid one. Yes, if you have, there are very few industries who have back orders, excess demand that can need to be fulfilled. Yes, they need to work on certain mechanisms. Cutting holidays is not an option as far as I'm concerned. You need to give people enough free time, enough space to operate. So other ways of, can we do improve productivity in other ways? Can we, as you earlier suggested, bring in more technology and mechanized basis of working to get better output and better quality? Then industries which are operating at less than the capacity that they are worth, I mean, there's no point asking people not to take leave or not to go on holiday. So they have to come up with a better platform on one side for strategy of the company. How do you now safeguard the orders you used to have? How do you need to diversify now? If your sector now, for example, if you're operating in tourism, or if you had some business related to entertainment, what are you going to do? You need to come up with a completely different business model. So there are a lot of other areas, more strategic areas to look at in terms of your business model, how it needs to be reshaped. And the least of my worries would be whether people need to take holidays or not, or whether people would need to take leave or not. I think it's a more of a secondary factor in the larger scheme of things.
Thanks, Rajitha. Shreya, do you think Rajitha has sufficiently answered that question, or is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, not really. I think that was a very lengthy answer. So yeah, I think it's covered.
Hussein, what about you? Is there anything that you'd like to add?
I completely, I think I'm completely agree with Rajitha.
Okay. I'm going to move on to globalization a little bit. And Hussein, if you wouldn't mind, there are three scenarios, or three potential scenarios for the global supply chain. Either it's going to become more localized, it's going to become regionalized, or it's going to continue to become more globalized. Which one do you think it's going to be? And what do you think the impact of your hypothesis is going to be in your industry?
So I think, just going by me watching the news and a personal opinion, but I do think that leading from the West, everyone else is especially the Western countries, are all about localization. You hear about Donald Trump going on TV every day about bringing jobs back to America, bringing manufacturing back to America, trying to secure job security in his own country. And I think that is rubbing off on a lot of the leaders spreading eastwards. But I think it's not as simple as he makes it out to be. I think these supply chains that have been built up over, the last couple of decades and are very strong. And there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of specialized skills and specialized skill sets developed in each of these manufacturers in different countries. Personally, for the tea industry, I think Ceylon tea, we are okay because we've always been selling the story of the champagne of teas, a premium product in the world. We never wanted to be a commodity. We always wanted to be priced above, the Kenyas or the Indias or the Chinas of the world. And I think now is the time for especially players like us, small countries like Sri Lanka, who have a generally good reputation around the world. And, you speak to anyone, they love Sri Lanka, they love Sri Lankans. It's a time for local companies to be aggressive and gain market share. I'm saying this in my own industry, in tea. I think we're placed in a unique position because number one is the demand is very good. It is a staple product and people are buying it in large volumes all over the world. And the other big thing working to our advantage is our competition is locked down. You take India, who's been one of our largest competitors in tea. Their national lockdown included tea estates, so tea has not been working. And you've got places like Darjeeling, Assam, which produce fantastic teas that are not being able to market it at the moment. And the same is true to certain estates in China, that they are locked down as well and they can't get their operations up. So it is a good time for local companies to reach new markets, penetrate new buyers, and really, really use this opportunity to grab what they can.
Thanks, Hussein. Shia, what about yourself? Do you think the future is going to be localization, regionalization, or continued globalization? And what would be the impact of your hypothesis on your industry?
If you take the actions in the coming weeks and what's happened, Sri Lanka almost has to look inward, given where we are, how heavily dependent we are as a country on food imports. I think that there is some necessity to look at food security. But I also feel, being a small country, we are not going to be able to do everything. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity to see how we can add more value to our supply chains. I mean, our group works with over 10,000 farmers with various crops, from soybean and corn, peanuts, to organic fruits and coconut products. And what we see is there's so little additional value on that chain. Even if you take our spice exports, for example, I mean, we have very unique products in this country. And it's quite ironical that we grow some of the best turmeric in the world, but all our consumption, all the turmeric for local consumption is imported from elsewhere. It's very ironic that this situation is here. We have we have a population of 20 million people, which in a sense, with limited purchasing power, which also in a sense is a limitation for investment. We need to have the volumes. So I think in that respect, you can't think locally only. You need to be able to look at global markets. So I believe, for me, we need to have rationalization. As a country, we need to ensure there's a balance between our food security, our imports, our food imports, and what we export. The food industry, I mean, tea has been an old product that has been there for several decades. But we have opportunities to really become big players in other markets too, given that we add value and not export bulk. So I think if we take this opportunity and do it right, but I also feel it is very important for government, private sector to work together, because nothing can be done overnight, especially in agriculture. There are seasons for planting. You need planting materials which don't just come about, and you cannot make this change over a few months. This has to be a concise plan over several years. If Sri Lanka really wants to focus more on our food security and become a relevant export player in some of the key high value products that we have.
Thanks, Shreya. Rajita, I'm going to pose you the same question, and then I'm going to ask some of the questions from the audience that we have. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think that it's going to be localization, regionalization, or globalization that is in the future?
Yeah, I believe the globalization will slow down. I mean, there would be a lot of protectionism measures that the countries would employ, because if you look at the post-COVID economic impact from the largest economies to the smallest, in terms of the impact of their size, I think it is across the board substantial. Whether it is US, China, or Sri Lanka, if you look at that impact on each of the economies, is going to be phenomenal. So every country will think about their citizens and their survival first. And then it will be going to be like, I mean, it was like that earlier as well, but we were beautifying it with nice phrases like globalization and so on. But now it's going to be even much harder of what you call survival of the fittest. So every country will use certain levels of protectionism at least for a couple of years. So we all need to be mindful of that. After saying that, definitely this entire supply chain cannot be localized. World is so interrelated and interconnected of each other for the supplies. So the direction that I see is that you need to establish strategic partnerships. That is, what companies would require, your customers, your supply chain would require is much more visibility, much more better security, and much more transparency on your supply chain. They would like to know what exactly is happening and how secure the supply chain is. So in that sense, there would need to be, in my opinion, a room for a lot of strategic partnerships. If you're operating on arm's length earlier, probably your customers would be more willing to extend more of long-term contracts, more cooperation with you in terms of how your manufacturing flows should need to be there, to the extent of them taking certain partnership in your business, probably investing part of your business in order to secure supply chain and ensuring that what they require is exactly implemented in your manufacturing footprint. So in that sense, I think we all should look for stronger such strategic relationships. Probably if you had 100 customers, you will have to rationalize it for maybe 50 or 60 of better ones for a larger volume within that segment, but have a very, very strong relationship. Then when it comes to in terms of, you look at from an inward perspective of Sri Lanka, definitely the policymakers as well as the businesses, the private sector and everybody will have to concentrate much more on the export-driven growth. That's not the solution that you could see. Import curtailment can work for a short term. Definitely these are whatever the government has instilled at the moment, as long as the industry is protected and now the mechanisms are put in, I think that is a short-term measure that is very much essential to safeguard the reserves of the country. And but in the longer run, I think a lot of concentration has to be there for export growth. We have been talking about a couple of years ago, $50 billion platform for exports. I mean, you're talking about 2025s and so on. Now, what COVID will put us is we will go back on our export earnings. Our last year export earnings have been something like, I believe, $60.4 billion US dollars. If you take the hit that has happened on the garment industry, export earnings of the tourism industry, if you offset that, the export earnings are going to be very much depleted when you adjust for those two alone. So how do you now recoup, come to that base level and grow? So this is where the value-added exports, the industries, what incentives that you would provide the foreign direct investment to come in, what facilities that you have in the country for the export posting zones. That is one of the major problems that Sri Lanka has. There's not enough water in the country for the industrial scale manufacturers, infrastructure in terms of power. So all those has to be of high priority, because if we are to have export-driven growth, which is an essential part of our national strategy going forward, and there has to be some immediate measures from every level of the country to ensure that infrastructure is created. Then the agricultural concentration on the agriculture. So that she also touched on this. I think it's very, very ironical what has happened. You import almost everything that is under the sun. What is manufactured, what can be done, what cannot. So she mentioned about this turmeric. I mean, the same is true for many crops. Why can't Sri Lanka has them? And if you look at for fruits, I mean, Sri Lanka has a tropical nature, so much of water. I mean, you can't see fruits being produced in Sri Lanka. So there has to be a significant concentration on the agricultural methods, agricultural inputs, and the agricultural supply chain to reduce wastage and value addition in terms of preservation and so on. So I think if you'd like, for a time being, that which is not our specialty, if you forget about the service sector, which is a separate part of a discussion among the experts of that sector, I think two national priorities that I could think of is exports, that is driven by the industry, and the second one is modernizing and putting a lot of emphasis on the agricultural base in Sri Lanka.
Thank you very, very much, Rajitha. I'm going to now very quickly ask some of the questions that have been asked from the members of the audience. The first one is for Hussein. Do you think consumers are going to be more conscious in future when they are taking that all-important buy decision? There's also a second question, which is really quite related. So I'm going to ask that as well, and I think your answer should cover both. Leading up to 2020, the trend towards lowering cost, increased convenience and increased speed, fast food, disposable consumerism, humans have been called weapons of mass consumption. Do you think consumers will reflect on the real costs of cheap products, both environmental and volumetric costs, when making that buy decision? Hussein.
So let's address the first part of that question. And I definitely think consumers are going to be more conscious. And I think price conscious is going to be one, because as Shia mentioned before, disposable incomes are going to be coming down in the future. You've seen unemployment in the US rise to, I think it was up to 35 million people since the start of March have been found with no jobs. So the buying power is definitely going to be less, and price consciousness is going to come in for all products. Of course, the basket of goods, or if you take Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the goods at the bottom, the food and the general staples that they need to survive, that's going to be the number one priority. Regarding the other things, you're talking cheap products and mass consumption. I really don't know. I could see it going both ways. I could see some people coming out of this saying, look at what all the harm, environmental damage has done, and the earth needed this to heal. We've been locked down for 2 months, and look at how beautiful our oceans have become. Look at all the animals in the wild again. We need to be more accountable. We need to be more understanding towards nature, and we need to reduce our footprint. But on the other hand, you've got the people who are actually starving, and they do not have money to put food on the table the next week. They do not have the luxury to make that kind of a decision. So that would be a pure price decision. So it's hard for me to narrow in one or the other, but I think what COVID has done is definitely made each view more polarizing. Each consumer in that bracket is going to be leaning far more towards that corner than sway in the middle anymore.
Thanks, Hussein. The next question is for Shia. What HR challenges are currently being faced in your industry, and what are the solutions to face them?
Pre-COVID, one of the biggest challenges we had was actually finding people in every aspect of our process. All of a sudden, and actually a lot of our automation, that the projects that we started were also with view that it was going to be hard to find people, and we were upskilling people to automate. So we have programs within our organization to do this. Come now, a few weeks, into 2020, and we are going to have in excess of 1 million people employed. So getting back to the question I have, what are our challenges? I think what I would like to see, we about 30% of our workforce, our executive cadre is women. I'd like to see more participation. and have more gender diversity. We see more and more women going for that higher job. We'd like to see more, but the reality is, I think with women, where we have multiple roles to play, it is a challenge. And I mean, at the end of the day, everyone will want to put their family first. I think it's interesting what happened in these last few weeks where people were forced to work from home. I think has opened the eyes of many in Sri Lanka to concepts of flexible working hours and job sharing. It was something that really was a very hard conversation. We were quite traditional in our employment processes as a country, I think. I think the IT industry has transcended that, but especially in manufacturing is one of the most traditional. So I think this opens out opportunity going forward for us to look at job roles in a completely different manner. And I mean, these are not decisions that we're going to make overnight, but I think definitely there'll be interesting conversations to be had. I think as a industry and as a company, we are very fortunate. We've been able to attract a fabulous team that we work with. So when I talk about challenges, I mean, when you have a very cohesive team that works well together, your challenges are not headaches anymore, but something to be resolved.
Thank you, Shia. I'm going to ask you one follow-up question. This is from Shiran Manukulu-Surya, Group Director, Capital Maharaja Organization. I think it's a clarification to your earlier point. He asks, did Shia say that they used an established e-commerce delivery logistics company for the distribution during lockdown, or did they start their own distribution network? And if both, which one was more effective?
We did both. And I think I can't say one was more effective than the other, because each has its own advantages, and they were targeted very differently. But the key point...
Had to choose.
Sorry?
If you had to choose, which one was more effective?
I wouldn't say, because we have multiple brands, and actually different brands use different strategies in getting to the marketplace, because and we didn't have time to really plan it, and it was more action. We needed to find a solution, and we just did it. It's probably not the most optimized solutions for either one, but definitely post-COVID, when we sit and evaluate, we would be evaluating the options that everything brings and have a more long-term solution for e-commerce.
Okay, thank you very much. One final question to Rajitha. What improvements or suggestions could you give policymakers in your industry?
Yeah. Now, in terms of the support or the enhancement of facilities for the industry, I think one of the most important is having the correct infrastructure. Now, for example, if you look at today, the Sri Lanka, all BOI zones are capped. There is only one industrial zone, which is Biagama, that has the industrial water supply. We are talking about significant quantities of water. For example, the glove industries that we are in, I used to work at Ansel earlier, and now, I mean, since 2010, I was at Haley's. Again, now responsible for oversight on the DPL, the glove arm. We are using more than 300, 400 cubic meters of water a day. That is 300,000 or 400,000 liters. Our active carbon business requires about 500 cubic meters of water a day, 500,000 liters. Today, the only zone that has that level of water capability is Vietnam. And I've been telling this at a couple of forums right through. There is no other industrial zone in Sri Lanka that has that access of industrial water. Today, Biagama is completely capped of industries. You can't find an acre of land for an investment. So when we are approaching a very critical investment arena to drive export growth, and a country with so much of abundance of water and the rainfall, I think proper measures need to be made how to preserve water and how to tap that. And having these industrial zones where large industries, chemical-based industries can be established, which can provide value-added services. So that is one of the most important infrastructure that Sri Lanka needs. And the second one is going to be the power. At the moment, we are in a threshold of a power crisis. I mean, a couple of governments right after the other has passed this ball back to the next government. No proper decisions have been taken in the power sector. As a result, in the absence of the next coal power plant that should have been established a couple of years ago, at least the decision to implement that has started by now. The emphasis placed on the renewables have to be much more in the current situation of sustainability, large wind farms, large solar farms, and so on, what China and many countries have done. So this power equation has to be resolved as well, because if we don't get adequate supply of the adequate rainfall, Sri Lanka will be again on power cuts very soon. So in order for us to drive this kind of export growth, primarily that power sector has to be stable. So establishment of large industrial zones with adequate industrial water and addressing of this power equation, I think, are two of the key requirements that I could request policymakers to look at, because rest of the equations, most of the private sectors with good marketing arms can take care of. So we can take care of the rest of the things, and please, the policymakers' attention should be there for that type of infrastructure provision and having a long-term time horizon on the industry.
Thank you, Rajitha. I'm not going to comment on the power and energy side of things, because we will be hosting a panel discussion in future to discuss energy and environment. And perhaps we look forward to you joining us as an attendee and asking those important questions at that time.
Yeah.
Panelists.
And then one more thing I could mention is one of the critical factors we are missing is the waste disposal.
Yes.
That is again the incineration capacity. Today we have only the geocycle, and that is the only industrial waste disposal that we have. So it's an essential part of the industry, and that is also need to be taken care of.
Thank you, Rajitha. Panelists, thank you very, very much for joining us today and for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. I'm going to leave you with a quote by Virginia Sater. Problems are not the problem. Coping is the problem. Our panelists today are Shreya Vikramasinghe, Group Managing Director of Ceylon Biscuits Limited, Rajitha Karyavasam, Managing Director, Haycarb PLC and Director, Haley's PLC, Hussein Akbar Ali, Director, Akbar Brothers. Thank you, a very big thank you to Chandra Jayaratna, former Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, for being rapporteur. A very big thank you to the Newsfirst team, as always, for making this possible. And thank you to the audience for your participation and your questions. My name is Nero Cook. This is Newsfirst. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.